Off the Record News. I'm your host, Diana Longry. Thank you for tuning in. Off the Record News is brought to you from the Valley Access Studios out of Stillwater. Now, Off the Record News, once a month, we have Councilmember Loren Sederstrom on our program to give us an update on what's going on in the city of Grant. Now, for those of you who maybe don't know where the city of Grant is, just think to yourself about, well, if you know where Highway 36 is, and you know where Roseville is, and you know where Stillwater is. Well, when you get closer to the end towards Stillwater, the city of Grant is north of Highway 36 out in the country. So that'll give you kind of an idea that if this is the first time that you're hearing about the city of Grant, that you're going, wow, I didn't know they were there, but they are there, and they have a lot going on at their city council meetings. Now, because they are a smaller community, their city council meetings are only once a month. But there is a lot of information and a lot of action that goes on at those city council meetings. And so that's why we have, as I indicated, Councilmember Loren Sederstrom here to talk about what's gone on over the past month. And also he has brought with him a number of clips to highlight those activities at the council. So, Mr. Sederstrom, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on. You know, it's the end of the year, plus we had a little mini crisis out there with a person that decided to dump a bunch of hydrovac trucks. And for those who don't know what a hydrovac is, it's a combination between a pressure washer that makes mud slurry and a big vacuum cleaner you put in the back of the truck, and they use that to excavate various things such as sewer pipes. They also pick up environmental spills with it. So we had an individual out there that was dumping about 400 of them, and it's not regulated.
400 trucks worth?
400 trucks
wow.
worth. Approximately 5,000 yards of dirt was filtered out of the slurry that they brought in. And so on his 3-acre property, it looked like he had a little mini mountain range. And the city was slow to act. They didn't quite understand what was going on. They didn't have an ordinance that covered it. However, finally, after about 6-8 weeks, we finally got them on board to issue a cease and desist letter, which they did. Within 1 week, they had already violated that, and we had to have a call. I called the police and made a full police report. And the last installment in this was when they issued a site restoration letter where they had to bring the site back to normal.
And when you say they, you mean the city attorney, correct?
The city attorney issued it and told the individual landowner that he had to bring it back because when he signed up for this whole fiasco, he signed up for a grading permit. And he was saying basically, oh, I just want to dig a pond and get some rocks. Well, in fact, that isn't what he did. He had 4 end-ups, which is 20 yards an end-up of 3-inch plus limestone put into a parking lot, and he dug a deep hole through the topsoil, through the clay, down into the gravel, so the liquid would readily flow through into the groundwater. And then he proceeded to bring in 400 to 500 trucks, up to 18 to 20 a day. And he maintains he's done nothing wrong, but that is commercial dumping, obviously. He owns a part owner in a hydrovac company, which has 10 trucks, and they're used for numerous things. But once again, here's an example where the ordinances haven't been able to keep up with technology.
Right.
We'll have another example of this later on.
Right, and in our past programs where you've been on, Mr. Sederstrom, we've shown film footage of the site and showing the extent to which the ground has been graded and altered, and also the large areas where you can see where the hydrovac dumping has occurred in the standing water. You've brought the grading permit application that was originally filed. And the reason that this is important in accountability between what somebody's grading permit application says and then the actual use of what they do at that property and to monitor what they do, I think this is a perfect example, because this particular grading permit application, it specifically says under the category of describe the proposed work or use. Nowhere does it say anything about being a site for dumping the contents of hydrovac trucks, or where that material is coming from, what type of material it is, what safeguards are being put in place. Instead, what it says is this: I want to screen some rock, clean up the pond for the ducks and other wildlife. I want to plant trees. The property was neglected by previous owner, and I want to make use of my land. So anyone who's looking at this application would come away thinking, okay, he's going to be hauling in some dirt that he's going to be screening the rocks for whatever purpose, maybe sizing them for different grades of rock for landscaping, that he wants to plant trees, that he wants to clean up the pond, and basically spruce it up. And yet, clearly, that is not the purpose of what was done to the land. And
what's interesting about that is I farmed it for approximately 6 years. I put hay in there for the previous owner, a little old lady, so she'd keep her green acres. And interestingly, he said he was going to clean up the pond. He never touched the pond. He dug a new hole to dump his hydrovac trucks. So, and he also said he was only going to use about 80 yards. Well, it's on a sliding schedule. If it's over 50 yards, you have to pay so much per yard. And he brought in between 5,000 and 7,000 yards of dirt. So it was totally erroneous. It was fictitious.
Right. And so the point is that he disturbed the land in a way that was contrary to this original grading permit application. And so that, of course, then is the basis upon then this letter that's been newly issued, that restoration letter, correct?
Absolutely.
And so the attorney, the city attorney office for the city of Grant, the city, Eckbert and Lammers is the city attorney that has drafted this up. They have issued that letter, and you have that here?
Yes, I do, and there are 10 conditions that they have to maintain. It's very interesting. They can't bring any more fill in, they can't take any fill out, and they have to spread it evenly around the whole property. And if there's any trash, which was the claim, there was trash there and there wasn't because it was a farm field, that they have to keep that separate. It has to be inspected. They have to take care of all the closing out all the permits from Browns Creek Watershed, from the MPCA, and also the City of Grant. And so there were a number of restrictions. It was very restrictive and very specific how we had to clean the site up, because obviously this was an abuse situation where he said he was going to do one thing and did something totally different. And not only that, the scope was much, much larger. There's a big difference between 80 yards and 5,000 to 7,000 yards.
And I could, I guess being the devil's advocate, looking at that grading permit application, there is one item in that section 1 describing the work and or use that maybe would apply to what he did, just being devil's advocate, and that would be the phrase, I want to make use of my land. But that is, as you indicated, an abuse of what the whole process is, because everything that comes before that is what itemizes and clarifies what the use of that land is looking to be. So, I want to mention that this restoration order, this letter issued by Eckbert and Lammers, is dated December 4th, 2017. And this program is being filmed on December 16th, 2017. Now, what happens if they don't follow this?
Well, they brought equipment in, and up until last Friday, they were working on it right through the 6th or 7th, actually a Monday, till last Monday they were actually working on it and fairly well restoring it. You can see they haven't completely done it yet because there's still mounds of dirt there. So I don't know what the guy's pulling. Also, he left one little pond that he dug. He didn't completely fill it. So I'm sure he's probably thinking he can pull another one of these numbers like he did earlier, he brought a convoy of 6 trucks in from 3M at 8:30 on Saturday night. Now, they're only allowed construction work 7 to 7 Monday through Friday, and Saturday it's 8 to 6, I believe. So, in other words, After hours, he thought he'd slip them in. And the guy's been very verbally abusive to me. And I've had a number of problems. I've had to call the sheriff a number of times because of the threats. So that's one thing. But it's really interesting, you know, because one of the things I was pushing hard to do is get a hydrovac moratorium on. Kind of like we had a solar gardens coming up, and we wanted to have a moratorium on any of those, the solar gardens, until we could develop an ordinance to set the parameters.
Right.
Now, this last city council meeting, once again, I put on a hydrovac moratorium, and I wanted to switch it from the discussion agenda to have the attorney discuss it. And our first clip is about that, me trying to put it on the agenda so the attorney can move it from the discussion to the attorney so he could discuss it. And if we play the first clip, we'll see what, and we can talk on the other side.
Excellent.
I'd like to move the moratorium that we have to talk to.
So moved.
Yeah, you already moved, guys. Second.
Move and second for dictatorship.
All those.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Would you like to hear his motion?
No, I'd like to listen to the clerk. Pardon me.
That was my question. Who made a motion?
Yeah, Tom,
Loren.
and then he seconded it. Loren wants to move something off the, I don't know, off something, but.
Well, I just want the moratorium so that our attorney can talk about it. Move it to his section. That's all I want.
Okay. I have, yeah. I'll tell you right now, Loren, I've got nothing in here, and we're going to go ahead and call the motion right now on your hydrovac moratorium. I've got nothing. So as I've talked to you about before, when I have nothing in the packet, it's really not important, I guess. We've got a first and a second to approve the regular agenda. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We have.
Explain to our viewers, first of all, we're at that part of the meeting where the council has to approve the agenda for the evening, correct?
Correct.
And so there is a time where council members can say if there's a change or an amendment to the agenda that they want to make prior to the council passing the agenda. And so you were trying to
move it from a discussion item to have the attorney discuss it. And one of the things you'll notice, they've changed the rules, both the consent and the regular agenda, is you have to have a motion and a second to add or delete anything. And normally, I'm being in the minority, the majority automatically votes no to the changes. They won't even let us correct the minutes, mind you, even if we've sent corrections in and they haven't been corrected correctly. That's too bad. They won't allow us to change it. So they're basically silencing the minority as best they can.
Right. So you were looking to change the item from just being a council discussion to allowing the city attorney to weigh in on what the pros and cons might be of this moratorium, how the process might work, all of those things having to do with the legal process, correct?
That's right.
Otherwise, if the council just had a discussion by themselves, what could you conclude?
Well, they would just say it's a discussion item and no action will be taken. The problem we have is the city council rarely gives direction to the staff, the planner, the engineer, or the attorney to do anything. This stuff just magically comes out of their staff meetings. They make a decision of what they want to do. On rare occasions, they're told, like the planner, to look at a solar garden ordinance. And like we saw last time, they went through the process, and she went through it and corrected it again, and then they struck the whole thing anyway.
The planner made corrections.
The planner made corrections. It went through the planning commission twice. The second time, they made the corrections, and then the council majority struck the whole thing and did nothing with it for the larger solar gardens and not the private ones.
Wow.
So it seems like the consultants are running the city, and the mayor and the rest of the council has little or no input. We never hear of any legal action until it's done.
Right. So I guess the point that I wanted to emphasize here is that how can the council have a meaningful discussion about a moratorium on hydrovac activities in the community if you haven't heard from your legal counsel? Because certainly the council would want to, I would think, want to understand what are the ramifications, what is the process, why or why not can we do this when we know we currently have somebody in our community who is engaging in this activity contrary to their grading permit? You see what I mean? There's a lot of legal issues that I can see that could come out of this, and I'm not quite sure how the council could have any kind of meaning discussion without that, other than the fact that the reason that they stopped you from having the attorney speak is because they don't want a moratorium and they don't want to be on the record as not wanting a moratorium. And of course, we know that many citizens in the city of Grant support having restrictions or regulations in place to protect the groundwater of Grant, considering the fact that everybody has a well.
That's right. The other interesting thing is, not the last meeting, the meeting before, I brought a chart up from our ordinance section, and it's 32-245, and it says right there, for dumping, it's not allowed. Liquid and solid dumping is not allowed in Grant. And he's saying, well, this isn't dumping, it's
now
just another,
who?
The mayor said, oh, well, this isn't just another method of transferring materials. Well, no, it isn't. Usually, hydrovac, about 25% of hydrovac is cleaning up environmental spills or other problems. And he ignored me, he cut me off. Again, getting this discussed at all is just...
And yet I noticed in that clip how he wanted to make sure that he heard what the city clerk had to say. He was dismissive of anything you had to say, but on the other hand, selectively, he wanted to hear what the city clerk had to say.
Yep. The next one, now
Yes.
that was the regular agenda. The next one we have another council member wanting to change the consent agenda, which normally takes just one request. But
Well,
they,
when you mean normally, you mean under the regular
Robert's
rules of order.
Yep.
Right, because under the regular Robert's rules of order, if somebody on a council wants to take something off the consent agenda because it isn't routine or regular, they want to discuss it or whatever, they can just say, I want to pull that from the consent agenda, and that is part of the process. And unfortunately, in the city of Grant, because they don't follow the Roberts Rules of Order, and that they have some whatever dictate that the parliamentarian, the city mayor Huber, wants to have, well, then what happens is that his rule is that you have to have a motion to take something off the consent agenda, then you need to have a second, and then they got to vote on whether or not it can be taken off the consent agenda. And so that means that the minority never is able to take anything off the consent agenda. So then everything gets bulldozed through by having it put on the consent agenda.
next month now, you will see that they will put the appointment list on the consent agenda. And of course, the consent agenda implies that there's nothing to discuss and everybody agrees with it. For example, the electric bill or the telephone bill.
Right.
How can you argue that? So they're in the habit of putting things on the consent agenda to pass it through without any discussion. So that's what this next clip is. If we could play that, we'll show you an example of that.
From the consent agenda.
Made a motion
Second.
to approve the consent.
We got
He-
a first and a second.
He made the motion first, Larry. Again,
Well-
It's yeah,
what?
Yeah.
It's
Go
a
ahead. Do we have a
dictatorship.
second
That's
for
exactly
Tom?
what we talked about.
All right, real good. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No, I want to make a point of interest or information.
Let's move forward, Larry.
Let's move forward, and I'm going to tell you that your minutes are not correct.
Okay.
And they're on the consent agenda. Your
Yeah.
bill list, I'd like some clarification on that. I'd like to have pulled out the consent.
And you
agenda.
can do that in between our meetings, which you steadfastly refuse to do
Actually,
every
Mayor
time
Carr,
we try to do that.
you are a damned liar. I did send minute corrections. They were not all made.
Mayor Huber. Trying to help you out
Mayor Huber, I
there.
guess that's-
There's no mayor card.
Yeah, there's no mayor anymore.
Wish we had. At least he had a little bit more respect.
Oh, jeez. Tom, you hear that?
I did?
You're a respectful guy,
How
Tom.
did I do?
One thing that always, I guess, gets my goat in a way is this idea that rather than doing the business of the city council at the city council meeting, do it in between the meetings, do it off the record, do it with the city clerk, do it so that the residents of the city of Grant don't know what's going on, can't see it, can't hear it.
Are you telling me you're advocating that radical situation called transparency?
Absolutely. And I think that the work of the council should be done at council meetings. That if there is a dispute or a difference of opinion or different viewpoints on how people should approach the issues of the city, it should be at the council meeting, in a public meeting, in front of the camera, so that everybody in the community can hear the community debate. It is not a dictatorship, and yet I see, not just in the city of Grant, I see in so many municipalities across the board that this is the way that business is conducted. And the only way that I think it will stop is that residents have to bring attention to it and actually hold their elected officials accountable, but few people do.
Well, one of the problems, too, is he, in fact, has supplied some corrections to the minutes. But the clerk doesn't. Larry Lanou has sent some corrections in, but he's at odds with the city clerk / administrator, and she doesn't always make the corrections that he sends in completely. So right now, all they do are recording the motions and the votes. The motions, the seconds, and the votes. They have nothing else in the minutes. They don't, have who came up and spoke, whatever else. So it's really pretty. The minutes sometimes can get pretty skewed and pretty goofed up, but it is what it is. And like the moratorium, I put on 3-4 times. Now this next month, I have to put definitions and some other things that's going to be written up, and it's going to be placed on the agenda for new business, assuming they will let it be put on. Many a times they will kick it to discussion so no action can be taken, and that's the dodge they hide under. They say that, well, this is just for discussion, we can't do anything. And they purposely do that. However, at the censure last January, it was not on the agenda, and at the discussion item, they came up and passed the motion. So they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. It's whatever the majority is, their rules, they bend it into a pretzel, whatever works for them, and that's what they do. They're trying to actively silence the minority, rarely do on few. As a matter of fact, the last March meeting, I said to the mayor, would you allow me to participate in the April meeting? You haven't allowed me to speak this whole meeting. And he did let me talk the next meeting once or twice, but...
Well, and a couple things that I want to mention is that it almost seems like they want to go back to the days of when City of Grant was a township, and they just had a township board of 3 individuals. And so this is constructively going back to the old days. And they are a city, they have a city council, they have 5 members, and it's different than the old days. The other thing I want to mention is that I heard in one of the previous clips there where they were saying, well, there's nothing in the packet information, and you alluded to that, where they are requiring you to produce the definitions. They're requiring you to put together a packet of information. They're requiring you, as a council member, to do all of the informational investigation of this, rather than instructing the planner to assist you, or the city clerk to assist you, or the city attorney to assist you. The people who are in a better position than a lay person who's serving as a city council member to put together this packet. And so I appreciate the predicament you're in, whereas you are doing the work of the professionals and the consultants that should be there to help the council, but if you want it to be discussed, you got to do the work yourself.
Well, one clarification. When I put this chart 32-245 of what's allowed and not allowed through zoning disposal of waste materials, it was in the packet. It wasn't, they would not discuss it. I had to go out in front of the podium and put it on the overhead to get him to talk about it, like we saw in the last show, and then he kept interrupting me the whole time, and he didn't want to discuss it. So if you get it in the packet, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be discussed either, because they will gloss over it. So the next one we're talking about, it's kind of interesting too. They should have had this done by November 30th. They didn't. It's called, they're going to talk about a cell booster. Now we have the cell towers all over the place, but now they're coming out as technology changes. We're just on top of a telephone pole. They can put a little cell tower booster to boost the signal, and they don't have to put a big tower up. But the problem is the law was going into effect, the state law, and you had to get it in under the wire so you could control it. Otherwise, the state law would take effect, and they could do anything when the people would not be regulated in each individual community. So it was put upon the individual communities to pass an ordinance, which is what they did. And that's what this next clip is about. We're talking about cell boosters on telephone poles and light poles. So if we could play the next clip.
51, which is really amending the current Chapter 28 on sidewalks and other public places. And really, this amendment is more related to small wireless cell facilities that potentially could be installed in the future in our right-of-ways. There's a lot of detail or a lot of information in the ordinances defining definitions and locations of these types of facilities, and also the permitting of these facilities. I'm not sure that I want to go into too much detail, but I would be happy to answer any questions regarding any of the information that's in the ordinance if you have any.
I love that. I'm not going to go into any of the details, but do you have any questions?
Well, we did have the ordinance in the packet, and we were allowed to look at it. And it was a pretty standardized, so it wasn't anything, but it's interesting.
But the people at home don't know anything about it. You see what I mean?
Well, what's interesting, too, is we're going to be following in the next two clips. We're talking about this. And one of the things that Larry and I did, they need a 4/5 majority for a summary publication. A summary publication, in essence, ladies and gentlemen, is 3 or 4 sentences describing what the 10-page ordinance means, which, and in this case, it was only 4 pages, but we voted against it. So they, at the last White Bear Press, they had to print the whole ordinance. Now, that wasn't all that expensive, but it comes back to transparency. Citizens should have the right to know what's going on, and they shouldn't have to make a special trip, make an appointment to town hall to get a copy of what's being passed. We should publish it in the local newspaper. It's the White Bear Press. It's not that expensive, so it's $100 or $200. It gives a lot of transparency, so citizens are aware of the ordinances were passed and what rules and regulations they have to follow. But the next two clips will be on this. It's kind of interesting with the next one.
No, there's nothing else for Brad here. We're all done.
He is on the agenda to be spoken to, and
On this ordinance.
issues.
On this ordinance.
On this ordinance.
Tell me what else is on the agenda, please.
All right.
What else is on the agenda? Don't just.
Safety and welfare of the city.
Okay.
We are going to talk about.
No, we're all done.
I've got
We're going to
someone
move to
I'd like
city
to talk
planner
to.
Jennifer Haskamp. It's not on the agenda. We're not going to do it. You can bring it up under discussion
We have
items.
Our engineer, while he is here.
Jennifer?
So I guess the engineer didn't get to speak. Well,
That's again how they subvert us. They come up with it's not on the agenda. Last 2 months ago, before we got through the discussion items, Deputy Mayor Carr said, I moved to adjourn, and Denny Kopp seconded it, so the discussion items never happened anyway. So again, they're very good at slamming things down. The next clip is going to be about the summary publication. You'll see that.
If you just want to explain that.
Yep, again, this is just a resolution, and it's for summary publication, and it's just meant to provide a shorter version of the ordinance for publication purposes to save money to the city. That summary publication does require a 4/5 vote of the council. Other than that, it's fairly routine.
Real good. Do I have a motion to approve the summary publication, please?
I'll move, so move. I'll second.
Very good. All those in favor of the summary publication, 2017-54, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, real good, gentlemen. 3-2.
There is no summary publication.
Okay, thank you.
One thing I want to point out to our viewers is that typically when a motion has been made and there is a second, then that is the opportunity for discussion. And that was never offered here. And they should have suspected that if they wanted a summary publication, that they would have opened it up for discussion so that maybe there could be a communication about it. But on the other hand, was there strategy behind them circumventing the discussion point because they knew that you guys were going to vote against it?
Well, they
didn't want to give you a platform for talking about the importance of transparency.
Well, the other thing is, are you familiar with the term of railroading? They tend to railroad things through, and they don't want to hear anything that's contrary to what they have. They do not want to hear the minority voice. I realize it's majority rule, but the function of the minority is to provide a voice and different perspectives in the majority. So that...
And this would have given the minority actually an opportunity and a platform to talk about the importance of transparency, why you support having the full ordinance printed. And by taking away and deciding, no, we're not even going to have discussion, which is typically what you would have after there's a motion and a second, then that even eliminated that opportunity for you to talk about the importance of having the full publication. So yes, you're going to have the full publication, but now you've had no opportunity to explain to the residents why that's important. You see what I mean? And so it's taken that away from you as well. So yes, you won something because the law required a 4/5 vote in order to do a summary. Sure, you won something, but we took something away from you anyway.
Which they traditionally do all the time. Again, this was a 4-page ordinance, and to summarize it in 4 sentences in the newspaper is ridiculous. And this talks about right-of-way. It isn't just the cell towers. It talks about what can be done on the right-of-way, in the ditches, whatever else. So it was quite an extensive reach of local government over right-of-way and what you can and can't do. So again, what they have to do is they have to come in and get permits. They have to go through all this stuff. And as we saw with the grading permit, the whole process can be a joke. Now, they've supposedly redefined the grading permit. I have yet to see anything done on it. We had an extensive discussion. They took inputs from me, and they're saying, oh, that's a good idea. Well, let's see what comes to bear on it because it hasn't been instituted yet.
Yeah, it's one thing to give the lip service and say, oh, yeah, Loren, you've got a great idea, but then if it doesn't actually get instituted in the process and included as part of that process, well, then it was just a hollow comment with nothing else behind it.
Well,
now, what's your next clip here?
Okay, we have to set this up because the next clip, what we had was we sent out for RFPs on for legal services. And we had a number of people come in and be interviewed and applied. I think we had 6 or 7 companies that came in. Eckberg Lammers, of course, is the one we had. Diane Longery came in. Kelly Lemons, Johnson Turner,
Fritz
Canuck, et cetera. So we had several of them come in. And the problem we had is the legal bills have been going just out of sight. And not only that, they haven't always been billed to the right thing. For example, one of our commissioners that was on the Charter Commission, that's right, had sent out something positive to go for the vote, and then it didn't pass. Well, what they did is they had a logo, and it's called, for Grant, it's called A Home in the Country, and a picture of a little school or a house in the center of this circle. Now, this was the result of a contest in about 2002. And the gentleman that won the contest, they picked his logo. Now, he never transferred the rights legally, which you have to do. The ownership was never transferred to the city. They spent approximately $40,000.
They who?
That was the Ekberg Lammers taking this man to court and went to the Office of Administrative Hearing.
Okay, but the man that they took to court was the guy who was with the Charter Commission,
He was a Charter
Right,
Commission member,
okay.
Jack Smith. They took him to Office of Administrative Hearing, and they came out with a $250 fine. Then his attorney appealed it to the Supreme Court. And then to hide this $40,000 charge, they charged it to the Charter Commission and not current legal fees. So we've had a number of problems.
Well, and then my question would be, okay, so if Eckbert and Lammers charged those legal fees where they were defending a claim of the city, but they charged that to the Charter Commission, who pays for the Charter Commission's budget?
The city of Grant.
So, in other words, it's still all the same pocket.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
taxpayer.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
They've run just wild with this. They've made a number of lawsuits. They sued Larry last year for censure, and they lost. They also sued him to get a conditional use permit and spent quite a few $1,000s on that, when in fact he was grandfathered in, but he lost that course, and he ended up getting...
And again, this is another thing that we've talked about on past shows that I am always puzzled by. How a city attorney who is hired by the city feels that they don't have a conflict and that they can engage in litigation on behalf of the city against a standing city council person. That, to me, doesn't seem quite right. I think it would have been better if they would have recused themselves, and actually then the city had to hire somebody else totally different. Because you may have actually ended up with a different spin on the whole thing, because that attorney may have had a different view of whether or not if it was really proper litigation to engage in the first place.
Well,
because they're not beholden to the majority of the council. You see, that's the thing, is that the city attorney is in some way beholden to the council majority, no matter what city you're talking about. I mean, it's just a matter of a vote of 3, and the city attorney is either in or out. And so if that city attorney feels that they have to do what that council majority wants, you know, it may have an impact on their judgment.
Well, the problem is that the city has been spent approximately $100,000 in legal fees, and for a city of 4,000 people to spend that kind of money is absolutely ridiculous. Not only that, the council never votes or never is involved in these. We don't hear about the lawsuits basically until they're over. I mean, we have no input at all. It's kind of, you know, like I said, Ekberg Lammers is kind of like a Mexican taxi driver on speed with the meter running, you know?
So anyway, so this RFP was put out by a miracle, asking for requests for proposals for various law firms to put in a proposal for legal services. And then I understand that the process was set up that each council member could look at all the applications, all the RFPs, and select who they wanted to have be there for an interview.
That's correct. And it was very interesting because the way they set it up, Ekberg Lammers was the last one to be voted on. And I'm sure, I suspect they conjured up that they were going to just let it go until the end, and then they'd be the last one and they'd have to get the majority. Secondhand Denny, we call him that because he seconds everything, wanted to propose Turner Johnson. And then you'll see this, you know.
And I would have to tell you that I was there for part of their interview by Turner and Johnson, and I thought they sounded very reputable. You know, as looking at a firm for a city attorney firm, I thought they came across very well. So I'm not surprised that Councilmember Kopp maybe would propose them.
Well, I wasn't either.
And maybe he's not happy with Ekberg and Lammers, and maybe he can't tell the majority that. You don't know.
Well, who knows? That's true. We don't know. What was interesting, when we're doing the interview process, I asked Nick Vivian, I said, now, how can you send a letter out on signs on a hay wagon in a pasture telling the lady to get a conditional use permit when state law stating that it is an artistic display, not political signs, when state law usurps that, it overrides it and says from August 1st until 10 days after the election, political signs of any size or shape are allowed. And Vivian said, well, we're allowed to interpret the law. Well,
And that was during your interview?
that was during the interview, which that's not interpretation of the law. If the law says one thing, you can't go around it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So anyway,
that's very fascinating to have asked a legal question of which you knew the answer to a candidate for the position. Excellent idea. So now you've got a clip, though, right, of
this
the
is
vote,
the clip
right?
and this was the first one up. And watch the faces of the people involved. It's very interesting. So if we could play that clip, please.
Quite some time. I've had a little break there, but we've been with Eckler Lammers for a long time. Different lawyers at the firm, but still the same thing. There was a short time there when we were not. I was not happy with that. Didn't turn out really good. So I think the continuity for me of the attorney, whoever we choose to stay with, and it's Eckler Lammers, they certainly know us well. They've been here and I think they've served us well. If we choose to go to somebody else, that's fine. I think my thing is continuity. I think the money part of it is also the issue, because if there's continuity and they have a grasp of our community, some of these attorneys that we interviewed are in the surrounding communities, Afton, May Township, and they have similar large acreage density issues the same as we do, so that's comforting. I would want to go with somebody like that if we decide to make a change. Obviously, Eckler Lammers is, they're a known quantity to us. Mm-hmm. So I think we've been served well by them, but I think going off RFPs was great. It was interesting. Are we going to change? I don't know. It's not my decision. It's the council's, and I look forward to any further discussion. So,
Mr. Culp.
I think everybody did a very nice job this morning. I was impressed with everybody. I may be the new guy on the council here, but I'm going to make a motion to approve Johnson Turner.
Okay.
I was very impressed,
that
very
motion.
impressed with what I saw, and I did an awful lot of homework.
Okay. And we have a second on the floor. Discussion? Loren?
I was also very impressed with him.
Okay.
The whole group was very impressed.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, we have a first and a second on the floor. All those in favor of Johnson Turner providing our legal services, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, gentlemen.
This is one issue that appears that you've got a vote of 5-0 on something that could have been a very contentious issue.
Well,
so I think it's going to be a good move for the city of Grant of having the new law firm to have a new view of the different legal issues that the city of Grant faces. And perhaps your legal bill will be less next year.
What I'd like to point out, however, if you notice, there were 3 ayes right away, and there was a hesitation for the other 2, so they could make it a complete majority. You know what I'm saying? So it was very interesting. It was very unexpected for them.
But congratulations on getting a change of attorney for the city of Grant.
Well, what's interesting is when we were sworn in, Nick Vivian had said, well, you're never going to get anything done. Well, guess what, Nick, baby? We just did.
That's right.
And you're gone. But, okay, so we now have a new attorney. We're going to see how that one flies. It's the January moratorium, or January meetings coming up with the appointment list. The question I have for you, and you have much more expertise in this, is it a possibility that they could re-vote on that and change it?
That's a puzzle.
Because
let's not give anybody any ideas.
Okay, we'll go on. Okay, now we're talking about we were talking about the hydrovac. We're coming back to that. We're going to have one more clip on that. And what we have is we're talking about the restoration order. Now, let me give you a little more background on this. Remember, I've been jumping up and down on this since August 14th. We finally, the end of September, got the attorney and city engineer to reverse themselves 180 degrees and to issue a cease and desist order, okay? Then they upgraded all their permits, got to the MPCA, the Browns Creek, and it was kind of a joke, to be honest with you, because I don't think the second part of it was any more truthful than the first part. So then they continued on, and their permit was allowed until October 31st, and then they were supposed to restore it, have 7 days to restore this area. However, the end of November comes and nothing's done. It's just sitting there with mounds and mounds of dirt, 10, 15 feet high, hundreds of feet long. And so then what they did is they issued a restoration order that we've already talked about with the 10 tight guidelines that they had to follow. And this clip is talking about the restoration order. So if we could play that.
With it, and then I sent out another update on that, I believe, just yesterday, signifying that the property owners had intended to restore their property with only the existing materials on their site, and the staff has issued a restoration order directing them to do that. It seemed to be the best course of action for the city to wrap that project up. And I understand from Councilmember Sederstrom that in fact some equipment was out there even today, so it looks like they will be moving forward with that project and wrapping up relatively soon here.
I'd like to compliment these Brad and Kevin on their fine work they've done on this. They've really turned it around. It was the dumping of the hydrovacs was a very high concern for me because we don't know what's in there. I think the city has to move forward, and we have to get an ordinance that, when you're going to backfill your new construction, you're not going to bring a hydrovac and dump it in there. You're going to go to a gravel pit. So I think the city really does need to move forward with this, and we have to get an ordinance that prohibits hydrovac dumping, because all of us have wells. And like I saw that 6 trucks coming in on Saturday night from 3M. We don't know what's in it. There's no manifest. So I think because all the citizens in Grant have wells, we should be very concerned about this.
Okay.
We'll be having you back again in January after you've had your January meeting. So then we'll be able to give a further update on whether or not it's been concluded, if that restoration has been completed, and also whether or not if anyone is ever going to be talking about a moratorium.
Well, one of the things that's also happening, I've talked to several concerned residents, and they're talking about getting a petition from the citizens. Now, this won't do anything. It will just wave a red flag in front of the bull because the mayor doesn't want to regulate this. The deputy mayor said we should have some materials, but there's a lot of pushback. They don't want to do anything. So we're going to, next month we'll tell you, well, we have a couple more things that were coming on, and these are just quick things. One of the things we have in Grant is we have a brushing and a road mowing, and the problem in Grant is all this like box elder and whatever else, buckthorn, grows up on the side of the road, and in the cities, in the Wright Tree Service or Aspen has a contract with the electric company that they have to cut the tops off. Well, here is a suggestion saying, hey, why don't we just cut everything, all the brush, instead of letting fill the ditches up, and that's what this is about. So we'll play this clip and we can talk on the other side.
And I would ask that this be put on and direct our staff to look into it. Currently, we have Wright tree trimming coming through our city. And I've talked to them out there, and they're doing an awful lot of trimming of scrub brush trees that are very costly. They said if the city were to adopt a policy to take these scrub trees that are underneath our power lines, which they have to come through there every 4 to 5 years, and cut them at the base, it would be more effective, costly, and would save the tree trimming that our brushing and staff do right now, cleaning up sides of our road. So if we would consider looking into allowing whether Wright or Aspen, whoever does it for the utility companies, take scrub trees that were obviously not planted. We got a lot of buckthorn out there and just scrub trees out there. Cut them at the base, throw them through the shredder. It will save money for the mower and the tree trimmer, and they are willing to do it, but they cannot do it without a city policy. So I'd ask that they would look into that. And the next future item I would ask.
Well, can I ask you a question on that one first? I mean, if you want support on that one, let me ask you a question on that one. What other cities have authorized right to designate what is a scrub and what is not a scrub tree? Because I know that some residents get pretty protective of that right away, and some of those trees might flower pretty and they might want to keep them. So I'm wondering what other cities have that type of policy that you can do.
I did talk to them. There are others that they said that they do that if it's considered a deal, but they have to have direction from your city. Now, we're a rural community. Now, if you're going to go in Indian Hills, let's say Victoria Station, Woodland Acres, and you can see that it's a planted pine tree, they're not going to come out there and cut that down. But you know the difference between a buckthorn and a scrub tree, and go look at what they're doing now. They're spending all kinds of time trimming it, and then they're picking up the brush where they could cut it at the base, run it through the shredder, and at that point, that's one less tree our current brusher has to take care of, because our roads are being encroached on.
One solution I can see here, Councilmember Sederstrom, is this, is that yes, there may be trees in the right-of-way that the property owner who owns the property right next to that right-of-way may say, well, I don't want that tree cut down. So an easy solution would be to just tell the homeowners and have the ordinance and the policy set up in such a way that the trees and the scrub brush would be cut down, but that the property owner would have the right to designate which trees on that right-of-way that are on their property would they like to have preserved and not cut down. That's an easy way to solve that problem. And I would be willing to bet there won't be that many trees that will be designated as savable. And yet you're able then to accommodate both needs.
Well, the other side of the coin is you look at like the planned unit development, Woodland Acres. Well, that's exactly what it is. It's lots of trees, and say they have 5 acres, and there may be brush growing for the first 100 feet. So if you're just taking it out of the ditch now, underneath the trees, we're not talking about going and clearing their land.
Right.
If you're talking, and we're not talking about little city lots here. We're talking about acreages. Someone may have 300 feet along the road, which a lot of properties have, and they have all that stuff growing up into the ditch. It's ludicrous to just go snip the top off, especially when it's just
Right.
free-ranging brush. And like you say, if it's something they've planted in ornamentation, and like Mr. Lanou had said, if it's one of these developments like Indian Hills that's around the golf course, sure, that makes sense.
Right, but they wouldn't have, in a planned unit development, they wouldn't have planted their landscaping under the electric lines. They wouldn't have done that because they don't want to have their trees that they've spent good money on to have all their tops trimmed off all the time.
Well, the mayor tends to be the mayor of no. He can come up with a reason not to do something all the time. We don't want a moratorium. We don't want to trim brush. So we're going to see where this goes. The next thing we're going to talk about is County Road 12 and County Road 9 is out by Wildwood School. And it kind of, the intersection where Jamaica comes down a hill to the county road, and it's kind of dark, and there's a school there, there's people going in and out. And this is the next issue that's brought up, and if we can play the clip, we'll talk on the other side.
Excellent.
Several issues. I mentioned it earlier. We should be considering a light on 75th and Jamaica. That's a county road, and 2 county roads and state road there. Whether the city puts it up or we talk to those agencies, it's a high traffic, it's got all the kids, it's very dark, it's always been that way. Look into Keats Avenue now that we've raised the road, and there was a arrow and a warning sign that was put up there, and that's not been put back. It was taken down during the raising of the road and all the construction that went there. So that should be put back up. We have no guardrails. The other issue that we have is if you go on the south side of that road, you will see you've got a cable that's hanging low. It's under 16 feet. It's under the legal size. Right now, it's the middle of it's been easy to drive in the middle of the road and avoid it if you had a large truck and you understood it. but I'm going to tell you that when these trucks come through there, they will rip it off as it is sitting there right now. So we should consider talking to whoever needs to get that table raised and some warning signs put back up along that road, because
You really can cause a lot of havoc if a truck snags one of those lines because they're too low.
Well, the other thing is that light on Jamaica, there's been several serious accidents there, and it would be wonderful to have a light there so for better safety. Okay, the next one's kind of interesting. We'll go to that and we'll talk on the other side.
when I asked Mr. Huber to expound about his participation in this, he abruptly ended the meeting. So one of the things I would ask for, just a second,
Here we go.
finish this up. If you want to look at staff or transparency, you abruptly, rather than explain it, you abrupted the meeting. But go on back and you look, there's a documentation. Mayor Huber has 97 domain names. The last one he has for a email is when he took another citizen of, he took our citizen of Grant, and he's currently in litigation against one of our citizens. And you look at the email he supplied for the court to respond to him, it's thegrantcon.com. He calls himself the Grant Con. It's in the Office of Administrative Hearings. If you'd like, there's a copy of it on the back. So why is
Somebody had Grant.
So what's this about?
Well, he's taking the gal that ran against him for mayor at Office of Administrative Hearing for irregularities, and he has nothing because she filed the final political report, and it's basically much ado about nothing. You will also hear about that next time, because he basically, she filed a campaign report. She spent exactly what she said she spent, and there's no basis for a charge.
And so his email that he's using says what?
GrantCon.com. Grant, Grant-CON, like is conning someone.
I see. And that's his email.
That's one of his emails.
I see. Well, maybe perhaps it's an indication of something very close to Mayor Huber.
Yep. Well, let's play the last one, and we'll go from there.
Sealing wells, unused wells, your drinking water, and your owner's guide to wells. Our water is probably one of the most important things we have in the city of Grant. And the reason I brought that forward is because our water supply was being put in jeopardy when this hydrovac dumping truck was bringing materials in from Building 260 at 3M. I was on site recently.
On site where?
In Forest Lake, hydrovac dumping was the hydrovac DHV, David Hydrovac, was in there taking
Okay,
materials
yeah,
out from me.
Mr. Carr, I'm gonna.
Please stop talking about people when
My
they're not
point
here.
is on our wells is that when you allowed you issued the permit to a commercial operation, and then you extended you release the cease and desist, and you give them another permit to operate. And
Do you want to tell the whole story, or should I do it at the end?
You can summarize.
I'll do it at the end?
So,
Okay, good.
I want to say I did work, and I want to thank Mr. Sandstrom over here for writing the cease and desist when we brought it to their attention, showed them that they didn't have the permitting, and if we watch the series of emails, it was Mayor Huber that was in support of bringing materials from outside our community, which would put our deal to rest.
This is going to be a continuing saga, I'm sure. We're going to, next month, we'll touch on again, because it's got a lot of residents upset because they have wells, so they don't want to see this continue. But I'm sure it's going to be a total fiasco come January. We're going to see what they're going to try to put on the consent agenda and sneak through. We'll see if they can we'll actually talk about hydrovac dumping and the other things we have going on. So I guess that's all we have now, but it will be interesting.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Councilmember Sederstrom, for coming on the program. And viewers, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Off the Record News. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Amend the agenda.
How would you like to amend it, please?
Okay.
Can you tell us how first?
Yep, I've got 3 items that I'd like to have considered.
Okay.
Okay.
Very quickly, let's hear them.
Motion to add the watershed districts who are in attendance here tonight to speak at the on the watershed flooding issues at